Hello, everybody. I hope you're all well. I'm still home. I guess you're still home too, and I wish we could be together. I hate doing this with the screen in the way. At least we can't catch anything this way, but maybe we can catch a good story. I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories. It's called Jewish Homesteaders on the Northern Plains, Rachel Calof's story. This is the book, paperback, Indiana University Press, and I came across it in the FIU bookstore about 15 years ago, I think it was. The book is very unusual and unforgettable once you hear the story. It's actually the book is several stories. It's University Press, and it's based on the search of the man who edited this book. His name is Sanford Raccoon, Professor Sanford Raccoon. I don't remember what university he's a professor at. It might have been Indiana. But nonetheless, he's from the Midwest and he's Jewish. And he was looking for 20 years ago, he was looking for information in Jewish archives across the Midwest. Of course, you know, it's called the Northern Plains, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Indiana, the Northern Plains of our country, very flat, not mountainous like the Rockies. Sanford Raccoon was looking for proof or archival documents relating to Jewish farmers. Yeah, you heard me right, farmers. Farmer, like it doesn't go together with the word Jewish. Jackie Mason would make a big deal out of this because he's always kibitzing about Jews who don't know how to fix cars and they don't know how to do mechanics. They just hire people. I bring him up because to most Americans and to most people in the world, when you ask them, where did the Jews go when they came to America in the 19th century, early 20th century? Where did the Jews go from Europe to America? Everybody knows the answer. They went to the Lower East Side. And what did they do there? They raised chickens? Oh, no. They were lucky if they raised pigeons on the roof of a tenement. They were lucky if they had a bed, an apartment in a tenement, because most of them were boarders and they couldn't afford the rent. They just paid people, you know, when the men came by themselves, that is. They slept in other people's apartments. They became boarders. So that's what everybody knows about the Jews of Europe who came to America, the Golden and Medina, except it's not true. I don't know the numbers. Sanford Raccoon probably knows the numbers, but I don't remember them. A lot of Jews saw the Lower East Side. They sweated in the sweatshops making trousers and shirtwaists for the rest of America, and they didn't like it because where they came from in Poland, Lithuania, it was called the Pale of Settlement. 6 to 7 million Jews lived in what was called the Pale of Settlement under Romanov rule for 400 years. Romanovs ruled a country called Russia that consisted of 1/6 of all the land on earth. Yeah, I'm going to repeat it. 1/6 of all the land on this planet belonged to one dynasty called the Romanovs, and they ruled Russia for 400 years. The Jews were not citizens. They were the largest group. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I guess you figured out that Rachel Calof must have been Russian. Um, Yeah, so when you ask people in the world, where did the Jews go, they'll all tell you to the sweatshops on the Lower East Side, but it isn't true. Many of them who had been farmers, like Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, he was a milkman. People like that came to America, and very often they went somewhere else. And Sanford Raccoon, the editor of this wonderful, wonderful book, it's on Amazon. It's been in 1 million printings. It's gone virtual, as they say. I don't know what you call it. It's a big hit, even though you never heard of it. I don't know why there's no opera about uh, the lady who wrote this memoir, because Sanford Raccoon, laughed at by everybody. What, are you crazy? You're looking for Jewish farmers in the archives of Ohio and Nebraska, Indiana. And sure enough, he found a memoir. And she wasn't alone, but this memoir that Rachel Calof wrote in her own handwriting in the language of Yiddish. She could speak English, but she didn't feel comfortable writing in English. So Yiddish was her mama lashon, her mother tongue, and Sanford Raccoon was the lucky professor who defied all possibilities, defied everybody who laughed at him. Surely there were Jewish farmers in the Midwest, in the plains, the northern plains. And he found this amazing piece of literature written by a woman who didn't go to school, who wasn't confident of her English speech or handwriting, although she spoke English, but she didn't feel comfortable writing in it. So she picked up a pad, not different from the one that my mother used to use to write letters. It had a clover leaf on the cover. And in 1936, when Rachel Calof was 60 years old in 1936, in the depths of the Depression, she wrote 90 pages of a memoir, not for you and me to read or talk about, not for Sanford Raccoon to even look at. She didn't think it was going to be in an archive, but her grandchildren, who were living through a severe depression, as you know, 1936 was a bad time for Americans, and she wrote this memoir to give them hope. So the reason it's in a book is because when Professor Raccoon found it, he and others tried to persuade the family, the Calof family, to publish this. And they said, what, are you crazy? She wrote this for us. It's personal. We don't want strangers to read it. Well, it took years, mostly because once they convinced the family to publish, that it would be of interest, not just to Jewish people, but to everybody. Once they convinced them to publish it, they had to translate it. So don't get worried. This is not a Yiddish book. It was written in the Mama Lashon, in the original, the mother tongue, it's called. It's not written in Yiddish. In fact, I don't think there's even a Yiddish word in the entire memoir. So in 1936, at the age of 60, she writes to her granddaughters, I was born in 1876 in Kiev, which of course was the Romanov Empire, but it's now the Ukraine capital. I was born in Kiev, and my dear mother died when I was 4, leaving me a half orphan. She tells us that she had an older brother, a younger sister, and a baby brother of 18 months. And she says that when a Jewish father marries a stepmother, he now becomes a stepfather. I never heard that expression, but what do I know? She says that's what Jews used to say back then. She was born in 1876. So this happens in 1880. She's 4 years old, loses her mother. And then she goes on to tell us that the sun stopped shining when her father remarried, because he would beat the children based on what the stepmother would tell him at the end of the day his children did. She had children of her own, and they were angels. She locked up all the cabinets with the food and wouldn't let his children eat until her children first ate. But it's really poignant and sad, even though this book is shocking and even uplifting. The author, the woman who wrote this, had an unbelievable sense of humor. and you catch a glimpse of it now and then. But unfortunately, when she watched her father beating up her little brother based on what the stepmother would tell him, she says that in her heart she began to hate her father and could never forgive him for what for the beatings that he gave her little brother and her big brother and her. Well, it isn't long, a couple of years later, the stepmother decides she's had enough. She takes her own children and leaves. What does a man do with, well, there are four of them. What does a man do with four children? And he's got to go to work. Well, this is very common. My own grandmother had this happen to her because her mother died when she was very young, and four sisters were sent out like Rachel is going to be to relatives. Her siblings are spread apart, uh, far away from each other, living in not an orphanage but Talmud Torahs, which uses the boys for labor. Her little sister becomes a worker, a maid for one of the other relatives, and she, the lucky one, she gets to go to her maternal grandfather. He's mean, he's nasty, and he can't stand the sight of me. That's what she says. He just looks at me and scowls. So the minute, see, she's trying to give us the understanding of not having any love in her life. Her mother died when she was 4, and since then the shadows have crept up on her life and the sun doesn't shine. She does have a sense of humor in her descriptions, and that's what makes this book bearable. It's sort of like Angela's Ashes. If you remember Frank McCourt, you didn't know whether you were laughing or crying when you read it. This is sad, but let's keep in mind that she's trying to encourage her grandchildren in 1936 not to be so bitter and to be so forlorn and hopeless about the Depression. And you ain't heard nothing yet. So she's at her grandfather, he's extremely religious. She describes him as a religious fanatic. And for a man like that, a girl is useless. She came without a dowry, he didn't want the burden, and he can barely tolerate her existence. But when she's about 14, 15 years old, or maybe a little older actually, she must be 16 or 17, the years go by. She has not seen very much of her sister and brothers because they are so far apart. And she's in pain over this because she feels responsible for taking care of them. In fact, she calls them my poor little orphans, as if she's the mother responsible for them. The father has absconded, and they do find out later that he is drowned or died in the sinking of the ship, because I haven't explained to you when I said, what does a father do with 4 kids when he's got to go to work? Well, he goes off to America and leaves them behind. That's what I meant about my grandmother. She had the same, I don't know if it was so common, but men abandoned their children when their wives died, and if they couldn't remarry successfully, they went off to America. That's what he did. And he dies along the way. At least that's what she hears. I'm not so sure that's true. It may be, you know, it may be a lie that they told the children, but she never sees her father again. So for all intents and purposes, he's gone. Whether he's alive or dead, nobody ever found out, but that was the report, that the ship to America sank. Well, she's now 16, 17, and she hears that there is an aunt who's very rich in another part of Kiev, very far away, but closer to her orphans. And she misses them and feels responsible for them. She asks her bitter, religious, fanatic grandfather if she can apply for a job as a maid in her rich aunt's house. He's glad to get rid of her, so off she goes to the rich aunt. She says the aunt was so wealthy she had a home paneled with wood. The floors were wood, the walls were wood, and wood needs polishing all day long, and so she got the job. But it's not hopeless yet because the sun begins to shine on her life. The aunt is kosher, not religiously fanatic, but she does buy kosher meat in town. Uh, I don't remember the name of the village, but Jews had no citizenship. You have to understand that they were not um, allowed to be citizens. They lived in shtetls unless they were very, very rich or had a business that benefited the Tsarist Empire. If you had a bank, if you owned a brick factory, if you owned a pharmacy, you could live outside of the shtetls with permission from the Tsarist regime. If you wanted to go touring Moscow or St. Petersburg and sleep in a hotel or motel or even on the street, you couldn't. You would be arrested for vagrancy because Jews had no permission to live or be overnight even outside of the shtetls. It was very rare. Well, maybe not so much because there were 6 million Jews there. So maybe some of them had advantages that the poorest of them didn't have. There's so much to talk about with the Jews of Russia. It's an amazing story, and most American Jews are from Russia, from Eastern Europe. It's very much rarer to be a German Jew or a Sephardic Jew than an Eastern European, meaning Lithuania, the Litvaks and the Galicianas, from Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Ukraine. These are all states of the Russian Empire, and Jews didn't have much of a life in those places. That's why most Jews in America today are from Ashkenazi, um, Eastern European descent. So where was I? She goes off to the aunt, and the aunt is sending her to the butcher every week. And this is so lovely. This is a beautiful part of the book because the sun comes out for her again. Finally, she's waited since the age of 4 to have a life, and now the butcher's son, the kosher butcher, has a son. He's 16 or 17. No, he must have been older because it's 1894 when this happens. She's 18 years old, so he's always smiling at her, and she loves going shopping for her aunt. And one day he asks her to go for a walk. She's horrified. Go for a walk alone in the village with a boy that I don't know? Walk alone on the street? And she's not. Girls didn't do this kind of thing. They had to be chaperoned. And then the boy holds her hand while they're walking together. Uh-oh. And then, yeah, and then he asks her for her grandfather's address. He says, Rachel, I need to talk to your grandfather. I want to ask permission to marry you. So give me his address. And she does. She likes this boy. We don't know his name. If you understand Yiddish, then you could read this book in reverse. It's all in English. There are no Yiddish words in there, but you can imagine a boy is a yingel. That's another word for young boy, but she gives him the address, and it looks like she's going to have happiness, anticipating the joy of somebody smiling at her. That was the big thing. He smiled when he saw her. Except the grandfather tells the boy, absolutely not. You can never marry my granddaughter. Now, what is the problem here? He'd love to be rid of this burden, obviously. He can't stand the idea that she's a girl At least that's the way she makes us think of the situation. But I didn't tell you that her name is not Calof when she's born. Her name is Rachel Bella Kahn. Well, in English, in Roman letters, we would spell it Kahn, but it is a Cyrillic alphabet, and I'm not going to spell it for you in Cyrillic, but the origin of the name Khan is Hebrew. And if you know any Hebrew, Kuf, the letter Kuf is a K, and the Hebrew words are three. I don't want to give you a Hebrew lesson right now, but just take it from me. Kuf, He, and Nun. These are the three letters of the name Khan that make up in Hebrew, because its origins are Hebrew. Kuf, He, Nun is the root of another word, Kohen. And I think some of you who are Jewish already figured it out. Her family are Kohanim. They are supposedly, nobody knows for sure, they're supposedly descended from Moses' brother. His name was Aaron. And Aaron is the lineage of the Kohanim, the priesthood of ancient Israel. And even though they're not rich people, they're not famous, they're not royal, but in Hebrew heritage, they are royal of some kind. There are different rules that apply to that Kohanim family. Now, your name doesn't have to be Khan. It could be Cohen, Cohn, Cohen. It could be Cowan, Cowan. It could be Kuhn, Kuhn is another one. So there are many derivations, and if you're a member of a family that is Kohanim, descended from Aaron, then you have different restrictions on your marriage and your, well, anyway, the butcher's son wasn't a Kohen, and that was the end of that. Her life was worthless now. And she says, where was I going to go? What should I do? I might as well go to America. I might as well find a... She was old already. She was 18 years old and didn't have any dowry, had no prospect. And she gave up all hope and decided, well, I can find somebody. And there was somebody looking for a wife. It was a woman. What was her name? Chaya Calof. Chaya Calof, somewhere in the boondocks of Kiev. I don't know where all these little shtetls are, but Chaya Calof was looking for a wife for her brother Abraham. Abraham Calof wrote a letter from the Lower East Side in New York to his sister Chaya back in Kiev, and find me a wife. And our Rachel Bella Khan, after that disappointment, the world didn't mean anything to her anymore. She had no future. She might as well marry this man and go to America. And so she goes to Chaya Kalof's home for the weekend, and she says they looked me up and down like they were buying a cow. And then they sat me on the divan, the couch, and they threw a ball of twine in my lap. It was full of knots, hundreds and hundreds of knots. And I spent the whole weekend taking all the knots out of that ball of twine. I didn't understand why they were doing this, but when I finished it, they told me, oh, Rachel, you make a perfect wife for our brother. You have the patience. You'll make a good wife. So she got the job. And now what's happening is very heartbreaking, because she loves her siblings and she has to kiss them and hug them at the railroad station, because I think you already know your geography, and that means she's not taking a boat from Kiev to the Lower East Side. She's got to go on a train ride for many, many days to Hamburg, Germany. And from Hamburg, she'll get on a boat up there with the music playing and the fine dishes. No, steerage. So they give her a ticket for steerage, the Atlantic Ocean. You know how long it took in 1894? She's 18 years old. 1894, it took 3.5 weeks from Hamburg. In Yes, so she hugs and kisses her siblings goodbye, and she says, I'll never see them again, and I know it. And she was correct. She's never going to see them again. Um, she gets on the train. She's got a burlap sack. Her grandfather and the other relatives happy to be rid of her. She goes off with a dress, some new stockings, some underwear, and some oranges for the journey, and a little bit of money. And when she gets to Hamburg, many, many days later on the train, oy vey, you're not prepared for this. This is like a thriller. It is a thriller. Is she going to make it to America, or isn't she? Well, she wrote the book. She wrote the book in 1936. She was 60 years old. Um, so she's going to make it, of course. But she gets to the ship. She's got the ticket. Abraham sent her the ticket. It cost him $25. $25 in 1894 was a fortune of money. He had to work in sweatshops a whole year to buy a one-way ticket in steerage that's down at the bottom of the ship with no windows. I'm going to show you a slide. Actually, I have a slideshow to show you, and we'll look at some pictures. But the captain now will not let her on board, and here's the reason why. She didn't understand that Chaya Calof had already found a girl for her brother in America. The girl's name was Rachel Chaffetz, and Rachel Chaffetz was even younger than this Rachel. And when she heard that she had to go across an ocean for 3.5 weeks, she said, no, I can't leave my family, I'm not going, and she backed out of the marriage. But remember, Abraham had slaved away a year to buy a ticket for $25. And what are they going to do with it now? They can't throw it away. They got to look for another Rachel. Rachel Chaffetz's name is on that ticket. So who's going to notice if there's a Rachel Kahn? You think anyone's going to notice? The captain? Nah. But he does notice because she's got the railroad ticket in the name of Rachel Kahn. And they won't let her on the ship. Now, I have to explain, the captain was not doing the wrong thing. Well, sort of wrong, but he was acting as a proper captain. Because I know from working for Pan Am Airlines years ago that airlines and ship companies pay huge fines when they bring people with questionable documents into the country. They pay fines in the millions of dollars every year. So he was doing the proper thing. She doesn't say that, but all she could do was sob. She went out on the pier, and now where's she going to go? She has no money to go back to Russia. She has no ticket to go forward to America, and she certainly doesn't have $25 to buy a new one. So she sobs and sobs, and out of the sky, out of nowhere, she says, came an angel. A young man who, she could not speak German, but with her Yiddish and his German, they managed to converse, and he took her to the captain, and he vouched for Rachel. He said, if anything is wrong, I will back her, and if she's whatever arrangement he made, but he felt such pity for this girl. And so she's on her way in steerage, all the way, 3.5 weeks, she almost died. It's sort of funny the way she talks about misery. It's like Frank McCourt's book, of Angela's Ashes. There's humor here. That's why the book is tolerable. It sounds like it must. It's awful to have gone through this, but she now is, we have to remember, she's 60 years old, and you don't know what she's going to survive next. So to her, this part of the story was practically nothing. You'll see what happens. Well, she gets to New York City. She was devastatingly sick. People had to carry her up to, there are no windows down there and no toilets, and they had to pick her up and lift her to the deck for her to have fresh air. And she was all alone, and people took care of her on the ship. That's how she survived. But she comes to Ellis Island, has been open now, 1894. It's been open for 2 years. The people who came before her went to a place called Castle Garden, which was much too small for the incoming millions. So Ellis Island was built, and she was one of the newcomers in that building. Uh, and the young man meets me with 2 oranges, she says. And boy, was an orange a gorgeous thing to behold. Yes, an orange. Where did they see oranges in Kiev? Only for rich people. And he met her at Ellis Island with 2 oranges, and he took her now, and she keeps calling him the Yingle, not in Yiddish, but in English it's translated. Uh, she calls him the young boy. And the young boy, what kind of country is this, she's telling us? In America, they let a young boy walk with a girl alone on the street in broad daylight. And then it gets worse because he brings her to the house, the apartment where he's sleeping. He doesn't, as I said earlier, a lot of these workers, they couldn't afford their own apartments, and why bother? They worked away sometimes 16 hours a day. There were no labor laws. The struggle for unionization was pathetic. So they worked, they worked themselves to death. Your ancestors, my ancestors, they didn't have a life. They never saw their children or their family. And so what do you need an apartment for? So he paid money to sleep in somebody's living room or dining room. And he brings her to the apartment, and she's horrified because what kind of country is this? It's filthy. It's so dirty, and they let women walk alone with boys on the street that they don't even know. Now remember, she's got a photograph of this man, this boy. Abraham Calof, she's never met in her life. I forgot to mention that. She's a picture bride. She's got a photograph of him, and this is the first time they're ever meeting. And he brings her, a strange boy, bringing her to an apartment where nobody's there. The owners are not even home. Oh my gosh, she's scared. She's not taken. He shows her where he sleeps in the dining room, and now he shows her where she's going to sleep, in the kitchen, in the pantry. They turned the pantry into a little bedroom. They put a bed in there, and that's her place for sleeping. So she goes in and lays down with her shoes on, her dress on, everything is on, because she's all alone, no chaperone. What kind of country is this? She closes her eyes, and when she opens them, there are cockroaches everywhere. She begins to scream and scream. He runs in. Rachel, what's the matter? What's wrong? And he looks, and he sees bed bugs and roaches. Oh, he says, okay, well, you come sleep in my bed. So she's already thinking this is a den of iniquity place, where they let girls alone to be with boys. And now the boy put cockroaches in my bed just to get me into his bed, is what she's thinking. But when he says, no, 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 I will sleep here and you can sleep in my bed. Oh, he's an honorable young boy. Okay, so she goes sleeping in his bed, and he sleeps in the pantry. And by the next day, she sort of likes him, and she's forgiving him she now realizes he's good. And she said, the thing that makes her think that is that he tells her the next day, you don't have to marry me. You can stay in America, just go to work and pay me back my $25. You owe me $25 for the ticket. Just give me back the money and you don't have to marry me. I'm not forcing you. But when he says that, she likes him because he's honorable. And so they're going to get married. Well, now they're engaged. Well, where's the mishpacha? Where's your mother? Your sister told me that everybody was here in America. Your mother, your father, your brother Charlie with his wife Faggy and their two little kids. And you have another brother named Moses and the cousins. They're all here, so let's get married. Oh no, we can't get married yet. No, Rachel, we have to wait. What are we waiting for? Well, you see, my mother and father have a farm and they have a lot of land. All my relatives have land and farms in North Dakota. Well, to her, that might as well have been in Brooklyn or on the next stop of the subway. What did she know about North Dakota? And she now says in this part of her memoir to her granddaughters, if anybody had told me what I was in store for, I thought I was going to fabulous estate with homes and land. It was homes and land in a place called North Dakota, Devil's Lake, North Dakota. If anybody had told me what lay ahead in Devil's Lake, North Dakota, I would have run screaming back to Kiev all the way home. But I didn't know what I was getting into, she said. So they go on the train. They don't get married yet. And she describes getting off many days later to such poverty. The descriptions of poverty in this book make Angela's Ashes look rich. Frank McCourt was rich compared to the people who were in Abraham Calof's family out in the northern plains. Devil's Lake is a place where many, many religious Jews ended up. I mean, they went everywhere, Nebraska, Iowa, Idaho, because of Abraham Lincoln. In 1861, he signed the Homestead Act, giving 1,600 acres to any person, unless they were Confederate. A Confederate person could not get the 1,600 acres, but anybody else, Indian, Black, Hispanic, a woman, as long as the woman was not married, a woman could own the land. This is called the Homestead Act. And if you, now they didn't give you the land to sit around and grow palm trees and papayas, of course not, but they gave you the land for a purpose. They needed America to be developed between the cities in the east and the eastern part of the country, the Midwest, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It was called Manifest Destiny. Not, I don't think it was called that in Lincoln's day, but that's what it was. We owned the land and we were pushing the Indians around, but that's another story for another time. Rachel has nothing to do with that, but when they get off the train, the mother-in-law and her sister, her future sister-in-law, in other words, Abraham's brother has his feet bound in shmatas because they don't own a pair of shoes. Now it's summer when they arrive in Devil's Lake. It's something like June, and they're not going to make a claim for their 1,600 acres for a very important reason. They're going to wait. First of all, they need money, not to buy the land. No, that's free. I'll get to that in a minute. But the 1,600 acres is what every member of the family, like his brother Charlie has 1,600 acres, and they give you, you build a hut. I want to call it a house, but it's a hut with a thatched roof. Now, if any of you listening here have ever listened to the Weather Channel and they talk about North Dakota, you should pay attention. Not because it matters to us here in Florida, but for understanding this book. The people who live in North Dakota live at the mercy of whatever comes out of the heavens. And it could be a tornado, it could be the end of your life, your cows, your chickens all up in the air, your house, your roof, tornadoes, horrific um, hailstorms, and anything you grew and labored away for a year or more can go up in a couple of minutes from whatever comes out of the sky. And let's not forget, 40 below zero, 20 below zero is normal in the wintertime. So these are Russians who are very hardy people, and they're not afraid of the weather, but they don't really know what's going to happen. You've got Mama and Papa. Uh, the mother's name is Harad, and the father's name is Shmuel. Harad and Shmuel Calof. They have a house with a thatched roof. It's made of sod. Sod is straw and mud packed into what looks like a brick, but it hardens in the sun, and they build the houses out of this because there's nowhere. They're poor, they have no bricks, they have no money for nails, because the roof of Charlie and Faggy's house, sod house, the thatched roof blew away in a tornado, and they don't have money to buy the nails to nail down the roof. It's just lying on the ground. So when they arrive in Devil's Lake, everybody's living in one house. Mama, Papa, Faggy and her two kids, and Charlie, who is Abraham's brother, and another brother named Moses, who's not married. All of these people are living in one house. It's something like 14 by 18 feet wide. Don't ask me where the bathroom is. It's a one-room hut with a thatched roof, and the hut is made out of not wood, it's made of straw. And it's a summer time, and they don't know what to expect when the winter comes. 40 below zero, oy vey. Well, they have no money to put the roof back on for Charlie and Faggy, so Abraham is the strongest of all the men. He goes off to another farm, many, many miles away, another city, and he works for the entire summer to earn $70. And with that $70, this is 1894. So $70 was a good amount of money, and they buy lots of things to prepare for the coming fall and winter. Now, you're wondering, are they going to get married already? Well, no. Yes and no. Many people did this. Not just Jews, but many people never even got married. The Homestead Act sort of encouraged living in sin, if you want to call it that. Many people didn't get married because the Homestead Act gave land, 1,600 acres. That's a huge amount of land. I want you to remember what I told you about Russia. Under the Romanovs, no Jew ever owned an inch of land. They were not citizens of the empire the way others were. So they're going to get 1,600 acres for her and 1,600 acres for him. That makes 3,200 acres. Now, if they're married, she can't have the acreage. It'll all be in his name. Now, many people did this, and they built their houses right next to each other on the border, and they lived in, what do you call that? I forgot what it's called. Public marriage, civic marriage, something like that. But they're different because they're Jewish, so they can get married with a rabbi. Now, I want you to know it took them 3 days. They borrowed a horse. They were so poor they didn't own a horse. They had an ox that they bought, because one of the stipulations of owning this land, because the government didn't give it to you right away. You had to prove yourself. You had to prove your willingness to dig in the earth, which was not easy. This stuff doesn't grow there. This is not farmland. This is, you call those things that roam in those bushes. There's not even a forest. At least in Kiev, they were surrounded by trees. You go out and you chop a tree and you're warm all winter. There's no tumbleweed. That's what. And they borrowed someone's horse and they went on a 3-day journey. They were not married. They went on a 3-day journey across the northern plains of North Dakota to get to Fargo from Devil's Lake. And there they made their claims. She got her 1,600 acres and he got his, and then they got married. Finally, no, well, he got $70 from working on a Jewish farm somewhere. So they didn't see each other the whole summer, and it was intolerable for her to be with her mother-in-law. This woman is a witch. The stories in the book about her mother, and stories, look how thin the book is. Look at this. Next to nothing. And a large part of the book are other people's essays. Sanford Raccoon, her son Jacob, who was born in 1912, he wrote an essay, and I had the pleasure of talking to him, because after I read this book, I knew he was still alive. He was born in 1912, and about 20 years ago, I guess, I read this book. It was published in 1994, 96. He was still alive in his 90s, and I had the delightful conversation with Jacob. He's one of the translators of his mother's Yiddish. And yeah, so where was I going? Yes, when this book was published, it was such a big hit in North Dakota that they had a festival in Devil's Lake to honor the book being published. And the mayor of Devil's Lake took Jacob, her son, in a Cadillac that was air conditioned from Devil's Lake to the place in Fargo where they made the claim. It took 1 hour in a Cadillac. It took his mother and father 3 days with a horse to get to make the claim. Well, they come back and there's going to be a wedding and everyone's happy. Now Jacob has money, $70, which they all go off and buy stuff. Well, I'll tell you what they buy in a minute, but they get married. She describes the chuppah, the canopy, as a burlap sack. And the women did not wear dresses. They wore pants like men, and they wrapped their feet in cloth because they didn't own any shoes. So that was a happy occasion, was finally getting married. People came. Now there were a lot of religious Jews in Devil's Lake. There are still remnants of mikvahs, the ritual baths, in the earth in that part of the country. And so there were a lot of people. They had a rabbi come and they had to pay him with chickens. I forgot how they paid him, but he brought chickens as a gift. That's what they gave each other, chickens, because you'll find out. What did they do with the $70? For the coming winter, and they had never lived in America and didn't know what to expect. They had to eat something, so they bought flour. Sacks and sacks of flour, which they bundled up inside the house, the 18 by 14 foot house. And because they don't know what to expect, they cannot live alone. They cannot live apart. They put the roof back on Charlie and Faggy's house, so they go off and live in their house many, many, many miles away. But Mama and Papa, they can't be left alone, and nobody knows what to expect, so they're all going to live together the first winter. Now, they've got bags and bags piled to the ceiling of flour. That's what they're going to eat. That's what they're going to live on, but you can't eat flour dry. Well, they got a well full of water outside, so, okay, flour and water. Ugh, that's matzah. You can't live a whole winter on that. You need eggs, but they got chickens, so they're never going to eat any chicken. They have 24 chickens when they start out. Mama and Papa's dozen and their dozen as a wedding gift. You're never going to eat a chicken, maybe once in a while, but you need those eggs. So you have to picture this. Inside the house, Mama and Papa have a bed hanging from the side of, hanging from the wall. On the other side of the house is another bed. The house is 18 feet wide. Uh, there's another bed hanging from the other wall, and that's the bridal suite. That's the honeymoon suite. Mama and Papa, Shmuel and Harad, sleeping there, and Rachel Bella Khan Calof, with her charming husband Abraham. He's still the young boy to her, even though he's 4 years older than her. The honeymoon suite is on the other side of the wall on a bed, hanging. Well, they got to do something with Brother Moses, so he goes in a corner on a straw mattress. Brother Moses, Mama, Papa, Rachel and her lovely husband. Now, what are you going to do with all those chickens? If you don't have anything to eat, you're not going to survive that winter, and you need the chickens for the eggs. You think in the weather description I gave you that a chicken is going to survive? It's going to lay an egg when it's 40 below zero? Never. Not even 20 below zero. And the tornadoes come, the cyclones come, and the chickens are all gone? No. So in the house come the chickens. They put a dozen chickens under Mama and Papa's bed and the other dozen chickens under the honeymoon suite. In order to keep the chickens from walking in and out of your feet, they put barbed chicken wire around the bed, each bed. So basically the bed is a chicken coop with a mattress on top of it. Okay, so let's see. They've got sacks and sacks of flour. They've got water outside. I told you, don't ask me where the bathrooms are. I'm not going to, I think you know, they're outside. So they've got a well with water for the flour. Now they got the eggs under the bed from the chickens. And they need milk. They bought a calf. That's not a big cow, that's a calf. You know, it's like 2 Great Danes, I suppose, 2 or 3 Great Danes. Well, that poor calf isn't going to give any milk if it's left outside. So into the house comes the calf. In the corner, opposite Brother Moses, who's sleeping on a mattress of straw, the calf is now sleeping on a mattress of straw. And she tells us how the chicken stank, but the perfume of the calf was horrendous. And the only thing she really, really missed was privacy. She had no privacy. As a young girl of 18, she wished to be with her new husband, but she couldn't. But don't worry about that, because she's going to have 10 births. 9 children survive the births. And all of this is going to be done between the beds, which I described, a bed there hanging on the wall, another bed on the opposite wall, and in between is a kitchen table made of wood. And it's on that table that she's going to give birth to 9 living children. And who is going to help her do the birthing? A doctor? Oh no. The doctor in the neighborhood, in the area, charges $25 to come to you, $25 to go home from you, and $20 to deliver your baby. They don't have another $70, and they're never going to have. And if they ever do, it's not worth spending the money, because Mama is going to live into her 90s, and every winter she's going to be living with them. After Shmuel dies, the father-in-law passes away, and Mama's all alone, and she can't be left alone in the winter in her own hut. So she's going to come every single winter and drive this poor young wife crazy, because the mother-in-law is a religious fanatic, 1,000 times worse than the grandfather that she left back in Kiev. I'm making this book sound like it's 800 pages, and the truth is, it could have been an 800-page book. I'm elaborating, but it's just a page turner. You can never find anything like this in an archive written by an ordinary person. It's very rare to find somebody with this kind of a gift. But she had a purpose to to give something of her suffering, the story of it, to her granddaughters who are now suffering through the depression and think that the world is coming to an end. Because you're not going to, well, okay, so she gives birth the first year to a little girl. The second year, always in the spring, she gets pregnant in the spring. Or is it she gets pregnant in the winter and she has the babies every spring? And, you know, you can't hate your mother-in-law if you have to depend upon her to save your life in childbirth. So they have no choice but to get along, even though they hate each other. The second year, she has another girl, Minnie and Hannah, and then the third year, it's a boy. And that is a big celebration because the boy is going to carry on the family name. Well, these people have succeeded so far in the land, is, as I try to tell you, is not given unless you can prove your ability to produce something like rye, wheat, barley, and they were doing very well. They managed, they worked very, very hard, and it looked like, and they did get the land because many people failed and didn't get the land because they couldn't produce. It's a very harsh area of the country for growing stuff. And so 3 years have gone by, and now she's given birth to a little boy. And they've decided that they can spare the ox, this big animal that has helped them grow the wheat and the barley, this big animal that has helped them to survive. Well, this animal is now going to be slaughtered by a shochet. They get a man, this is the name of a ritual slaughterer who's certified. Usually he's a rabbi, I think. And he comes to slaughter the ox as they are having a celebration over the boy, the birth of the boy. But when he slaughters the ox, a lot of people don't know this, but I came from an ultra-Orthodox, half of my family were very Orthodox. And I knew about this, but a lot of people don't. You think that meat is kosher. If you just go into a kosher butcher and buy meat, it's kosher. Well, it didn't become kosher. There's all varieties of kosher and who blesses it and who certifies it and all that. But there's a requirement of the meat before it even is certified by anybody. And that is when the animal is killed, it isn't kosher yet. The liver and the innards, the organs have to be inspected by the shochet, the man who did the slaughtering, because if there's anything irregular about the inner organs, then you cannot claim that it's kosher. It's not kosher. In this case, the liver had a stone in it, and he now pronounces now they just slaughtered the only work animal they had. They can't get another one, and now they're salivating for meat because nobody in this family in 3 years has eaten one piece of meat. Yes, they've had chicken every now and then. They've been living on something that she calls tegelach, made of the flour and the eggs and the milk and whatever they can gather on the plains, wild garlic, wild onions, but there's no food growing there really. And, well, they grow barley and wheat, but the shochet just told them, you can't eat this, it's not kosher. And everybody is so upset. And then somebody says, well, we're going to eat it anyway. We haven't had meat in 3 years, and we're going to eat this. And the mother-in-law, the witch, she says, if you dare take one piece of that unkosher meat, I won't take a glass of water in your house. Oh boy, were they happy to hear that. They all ate the meat because the shochet told them, when he looked at Rachel, she's still breastfeeding 2 babies, and she just gave birth to a baby she's breastfeeding, and she's breastfeeding the other baby. So He looks at her and she's totally emaciated, malnourished, and he now tells the family there is a higher cause, a higher law in kashrut, a higher law that says if you are starving to save a life, you must eat anything. To save a life, everything's kosher. So they all enjoyed the meat. And the way she tells it, it's cute. The best part for me is because as they go on, she's going to have 9 children alive. One of them dies in childbirth, so there are only 9. And it's a very harsh life. Of course, things get better. Abraham he builds a real house. They build it with an attic, not an attic, a cellar, because when the cyclones come, you really need a cellar to hide in. Uh, the children work on the farm. They're mostly girls with a couple of boys. And yeah, the part that I love the best is as time goes on, uh, she describes how she cleaned the house and took care of it when the mother-in-law would go back to her own place. And one day she didn't have anything to cook for her husband, who was working outside all day in the fields. And she was worried because if he came in, there was nothing she had to cook for him. So she went out looking with her apron around her waist, and she found things that looked like garlic, wild garlic, and she tasted it, okay, so she gathered the wild garlic, and then she found things that looked like onions, and she gathered those, and then she found things that looked like mushrooms. And you know what she did? She bit a tiny piece of every one to make sure she wasn't going to kill her husband. She tested it on herself, and as she didn't get sick and die, so she picked the rest of the mushrooms and took them back into the house, and with the fresh cream and the fresh butter from the calf, she cooked the garlic, the wild garlic with the wild mushrooms and the wild onions. And she had nothing to serve to drink, so she boiled barley. She boiled barley and made barley water. And as he walked through the door of their little house with Mama gone, remember, Mama has left them alone. It's the spring. And as he walked through the door, she noticed the sun behind him going down. And he walked in and he sat down, and the two of them ate together alone. A meal of wild mushrooms, wild onions, and barley water. And you would swear that she was eating in Lutece, in the fanciest French restaurant in Manhattan, that they were, the love and the romance, it was beautiful. It's a short page, but it tells you everything about rewards that come now and then in a life of unbelievable hardship. And so life goes on. They build a schoolhouse. Abraham builds a one-room schoolhouse for all the children in the area. And he teaches himself how to read and write English, and he becomes an intellectual. And a lot of people would roam around the country and get involved in politics and political. There was no TV or radio, so they loved to interact and have speeches, give speeches and talk about politics of the day and America. So things are getting better. They have a big house and they acquire more land. They become, I don't know how rich, but they are wealthy because everybody else gives up. It's an amazing thing. I looked it up once. It's something like 85% failure rate. And all of their relatives failed. Most of the Jews around there did fail, and they left. The Calofs were successful. So she says to her granddaughters that two presidents gave her husband certificates of honor because it was so rare for people to succeed. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, the presidents gave, President Taft was one of them, he gave Abraham Calof a certificate, but not you, Rachel. Look what you went through. You gave birth on a kitchen table because the doctor charged so much money, and you tested the mushrooms on your own self rather than accidentally kill your husband. And look what you put up with, and you don't want a certificate? Well, the next paragraph, she answers my question. She says, I didn't need a certificate because I knew that I stood shoulder to shoulder with my man, and I knew that I had succeeded, and I didn't need a piece of paper to tell me that. It is so beautiful. This is the end of the book. She's now about to tell her granddaughters that the journey, this is exactly, I never forgot it. She's, after saying that she didn't need a certificate because she knew she was worthy. I'm paraphrasing it, but that's what she's saying. My husband needed the certificate, but I didn't. I stood shoulder to shoulder with him. And then she says to her granddaughters, the journey that I took from Kiev was a torturous journey. But if you love the living of life, you will always know that the journey was well worth it. And that was the meaning of this book for her, writing it for her grandchildren. That's why it ended up in the archive in Ohio. I think it was Cleveland, Ohio, but it might have been Cincinnati. There are two fantastic Jewish archives there. And Sanford Raccoon found this marvelous piece of literature written entirely in Yiddish. Beautifully, they got it translated beautifully. And it's full of, it was the son that translated this with all the humor and meaning that his mother would have brought to the English language had she written it there. So let me show you. We're going to share the screen. And here is a slideshow that there. Let's see if we can get it to move. There. This is the cover of the book, Rachel Calof's story, Jewish homesteader on the Northern Plains. And she was not, this is when she was 18 years old. This is not unique just to Rachel Bella Khan Calof. As you're going to see, this is Abraham, handsome with his mustache, and here she is at age 60. She's going to die at the age of 76 in 1954, and it's going to be in Milwaukee. They sell their property because their children are older and have gotten married and gone off to California and Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Washington State. And they're worn out, 1912, they sell the property. So 94, 6, and so 18 years. This is what a house would have looked like in Ukraine, in Kiev. Here's another view of such a house. At least it had a nice roof. And notice all the trees. And notice all the lumber. You don't freeze in the Ukraine. You don't, because you just go out, you chop wood, and there you are. But I didn't tell you what they used for warmth and cooking in Devil's Lake. They're called buffalo chips. The cow manure, ox manure, whatever animal, they collect the manure. It has tons of methane, and they dry it in the sun into pancakes mixed with straw. And that is very good fuel, but it stinks to high heaven. And that's how they cook their tegelach, and how they kept themselves warm. They were too poor to have candles in the beginning. It got better, of course. It got better as time went on. This is Hamburg, what the port would have looked like to Rachel Calof as the captain would not let her on the ship. This is another view of Hamburg. And this is what perhaps the inside of steerage looked like in 1894. It was disgusting. It was inhumane. That's what $25 bought you. You had a slave for 1 year to buy that ticket per person. And this is, of course, the great Ellis Island that accommodated millions of Sicilians, millions of Poles and Germans and Russians and uh, everybody who made this country, who dug the sewers, everybody built the bridges, everything. There they are, the immigrants. And this is what she would have seen on Hester Street or Rivington Street. I'm not sure what street this is actually. I come from that neighborhood myself. And this is what it would have looked like with all the push carts. And there's Devil's Lake. Imagine going from this to this. So what can you do? People, yes. And so there were thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands perhaps, of Jews from Eastern Europe, not so much German Jews because they were merchants and they were more educated because there were fewer Jews in Germany. As I said, there were 6 million, at least 6 million in the Tsarist Empire, but maybe, if that much, 500,000 in the German-Prussian. And there it is. There's the Great Plains, as you can see there. I'm sure you remember your geography from school. The Great Plains. There's no mountain. There's nothing but wild mushrooms. The Homestead Act gave 160 acres of land in the West to the head of the household for 5 years, and you had to prove that you could handle it. And this is what a sod house, compare it to the house I showed you in Russia. This is a sod house in North Dakota. And this is what a cyclone might look like. Of course, there are much worse pictures than this. Amtrak in the modern Devil's Lake. And there's the Devil's Lake. This is Devil's Lake from the air. And this is downtown Devil's Lake. Downtown Devil's Lake, 2012. And the snow. And the sand. The cattle. The weeds and the grass. Now, Devil's Lake had so many Jews, and these are 2 of them, and their relatives come every year to pay homage, to go to the cemetery, as you're going to see. They turned Rachel Calof's story into a musical, but it's only been in North Dakota. It hasn't toured. Jewish history in North Dakota comes to the stage. And this is the play. It's a musical. 2014, a memoir with music, and the star is Kate Fugley, and here she is playing Rachel Calof. And these are some of the visitors, and some more pictures of what it would have looked like to be out on the plains. Oh, this is Harad Calof. The poor woman, she must have had a worse life than Rachel. And there they are. This is, I don't know which children this is, but that's Rachel and Abraham here. Very nice. And here is the mishpucha. Oh, let's see if I can get this out of the way. Nope. Well, Minnie, and there's Mama and Papa. It's a closer picture. It's very hard life. These are the children of the one-room schoolhouse. They're all different ages and all different sizes. They're all pretty much Jewish. And this is the synagogue gathering. The pictures are they're not enhanced in any way. It's too bad. And that's Abraham and Rachel as they move on to Milwaukee, Minneapolis. They move to Minneapolis and they open up a shop which is going to be a problem for them because they've never lived in a big city together. It was a war they were living in. They were fighting against the elements and fighting against nature and fighting all the hardships together. And they loved each other. And then they give it all up and they get rich quick. It's not so quick. They sell the land and they now become city people, which they were not prepared for. They were not prepared to be storekeepers. They had, I think it was a dry goods store, and it fails. And uh, Abraham decides that he wants to go traveling around and give lectures. He wants to be an intellectual, arguing with politicians, and she does not want that at all. After a hard life that they had, she just wants to be with her 9 children and their spouses, her grandchildren, and she wants to live out her life that way. And Abraham went traveling, and they were never living together at the end. I know this is not a Hollywood ending. Um, there they are again. Now, these are people who come to Devil's Lake on a yearly basis to pay respects to the people, to their ancestors. And this is Sons of Jacob Cemetery. And they've come to honor the dead who lived and died on this northern plain. These are the homesteaders of the Jewish religion. You can see all these names. There's so many of them. Sons of Jacob Cemetery. And these are some of their relatives making etchings from the engraving on the headstones. This is Yisrael ben Pinchas Greenberg. Pinchas Greenberg. Oh, Israel Greenberg, 1892. He died in 03. This is not Rachel's family. These are other people. And they actually bring bus tours to the cemetery in North Dakota, people who want to see and learn about homesteading. Now, this is actually a lumber. This house is made of wood. And this is Jeff Calof family. There are hundreds of Calofs. Jewish homesteaders, more Calofs, more Calofs. I don't know who these people are, but they're relatives of the Plains Jews. More. This is them. I love this picture. Isn't it lovely? Oh, I love that picture. And there she is again. And we can stop sharing. Stop share. I'm still learning how to do this. I wish I were with you so you could ask me questions and argue. Or, well, a funny thing happened. I was doing this story in Pompano, Pompano Beach a couple of years ago. And a woman came up, she was in her 90s, and she said, "This is my life. You just told the story of my life." I said, "Really?" She was Jewish, and she says, "The only thing different about your story from my life is that I lived in Idaho." Really? Yeah, my family had a farm in Idaho, and we suffered, and we lived this way. And I said, "Well, why don't you write a memoir?" "Oh, I've tried," she says. "I've tried to write a memoir, but I need help. My daughter doesn't want to help me." "Your daughter doesn't want to help you? Why?" "My daughter's too busy. She's always on television." "What is your daughter on television?" "Oh, uh-oh. I just forgot her name." Oh, yeah. I always have a problem with her name, Susie Orman. Yeah. This was Susie. Her name is Ann Orman. She died a few years ago. But I used to go to the place where she lived, and in Pompano Beach on the ocean. She was a lovely woman. And her daughter is lovely. But who would ever, isn't that something? Would you ever, when you see Susie Orman on public television telling you about your finances and how to invest your money and all that, would you ever think that she had this kind of life in her past? that's really survival. It's really amazing that people, but most of them didn't survive. This was too hard. And if you're interested in Jews as farmers, you can figure from 1880, the date, because they discuss this in the book. The book isn't just Rachel Calof, it's also essays, one of them by Jacob, who I told you I spoke with, and he was delightful. He told me, my mother said it's a war. Life is a war. America was like being in a war, and we survived it. Yes, so Jacob wrote an essay in here, and so does, of course, Sanford Raccoon and another woman. There's commentary about everything I told you, and I left out so many things. Rachel Kalof's story, Jewish homesteader on the Northern Plains, and it's Indiana University Press. And I gave this book to my son, and he gave it to so many people love this book. When they read it, they can't ever forget it. So I hope you don't forget it. And my email address is rdelmont@comcast.net. And if you have something you want to tell me, ask me. I wish I were with you, but I'm not. What can I do? So have a good day, evening, whenever they show this to you, and be well. Be well. So we'll be together soon. Maybe July, hopefully. Bye, everybody. I don't know how to shut it off. I hate to leave, you know that. End to screen? No, end.